Pleased to say I'm joined by former GA president, among other things, Nicky Brennan. Nicky, first off, you had a tough time of it. You had COVID-19 yourself, very difficult time. Can you explain what that was like, and were you fearing the worst?
I was worried, Shane. Yeah, it happened just before Easter, and I suppose for a 2 week period, it was very challenging. After that, it still took me a good while to overcome it. How I got it, I just don't know. My wife got it for 3 or 4 days before I got it, and it was like a bad flu from her point of view. But God, when I got it, I went down, as they say, like a ton of bricks. I was feeling sweaty, feverish, pains all over, terrible cough. But one thing I didn't have was any breathing problems, thank God. Maybe that's because, and they said to me after, it possibly was because of my swimming in that. But I eventually got in to get a test. Now, I kind of knew what the result was, but Shane, I've met you quite a number of times inside in Nolan Park, so you kind of picture what it was like for me being driven into Nolan Park, albeit in the angle there, you know what I'm talking about, and getting tested in there and looking up at Nolan Park and all the things that go through your mind. But look, I had to go to hospital. I got tested in there, and I reckon I could, while I knew I had it pretty bad, I reckoned I could overcome it at home. And I suppose that gave me a sense of confidence heading home. And while it was quite some time to get back on track, I suppose slowly then I started to get better after a period of time. But very worrying. But look, I'm very grateful. And I also know that there were plenty of people in a much worse position than I was. And sadly, so many of them are now dead, and families are suffering at a terrible rate around the whole country.
Yeah.
So I have a lot to be grateful for, and it was a stressful period, and it's nice to be at the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and tough on your family too. And I suppose with most illnesses, if you are going to recover, you can have support networks around you and your family of all the different generations. I presume you more or less had to keep yourself to yourself within your family home.
Oh, very much. Well, my wife and myself we were the only two people here. Our children obviously were not able to come for a long time, and they'd come and drop stuff at the door. Our grandchildren might be out in a car and you'd wave out at them, but that was typical of what was happening around the country. And I also have a brother that has a number of nursing homes, and him and three more of my brothers and sisters work with him in that business. So it was stressful wondering how they were going to cope with things as well, and with 5 nursing homes. So, I mean, they managed it well. They ran the operation very tight. And they had no experiences of the coronavirus in their nursing homes. So, but it was worrying because you're thinking about them as well and the stress they're going through.
Absolutely, because like the nursing homes and care settings have been ravaged up and down the country. And not to go too deep into it, but what do you think that they did that allowed them to get through it okay thus far?
Well, I know from an early stage, and this was in February, that they went into lockdown themselves. Probably not something that the loved ones of the people that were in the nursing homes probably weren't too happy about, maybe to an extent, but they saw what was coming down the line. They took a strong control on that. They obviously looked after the staff in terms of making sure that the process about washing hands and the other sort of experiences. They got hold of the PPE, although a lot of that was slow in the nursing homes, and it's probably when an inquiry does take place or a review takes place, I expect that'll be something coming up. But they ran a managed shop well. They were very tight on patients coming from the hospital environment into the nursing homes, that they were tested. So I think they decided there was a real strict code of practice that they needed to conduct. And at the end of the day, I think that was very helpful.
Absolutely. So you spent many years in the GA as a player, as a manager, as a GA president. So you know from top to bottom, administratively and everything beneath that, what it's like, and perhaps you have a taste of the challenges coming ahead, because you've probably seen every situation, and we've seen the guidelines trying to get back to playing games, and the club, of course, is supposed to resume on the 31st of July, back collective training July 20 as we're speaking, September 14th for intercounty teams to get their players together, and October 17th for the games to return. What are the initial issues that are hitting you in the face with this?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that there is now a timeline out there, notwithstanding the challenges that we're going to talk about during this chat. But I think the fact that I think the GA have done a good job up to now keeping people informed. They were very much working towards the guidelines laid down by the medical experts and the government on this matter, and I think they were wise to do that. Now, in terms of the proposals or the guidelines that came out last Friday, I think the first thing that should be said, it puts a huge lot of responsibility on club officials. And I imagine clubs all over the country this particular week, as we're chatting, are now sitting down looking at that and realising all of the procedures they have to put in place about their club grounds. For now, of course, dressing rooms and other club buildings are out of bounds, but nevertheless, they have to do a lot of procedures around appointing COVID officers in the club. People involved with each team must know what's going on. There's the filling in of health forms. There's the signage around grounds. So there's a whole lot of procedure, Shane, that's putting a lot of pressure on clubs.
Do you think too much is being asked of clubs? I mean, I think most people around the country wanted to see clubs get back first, but if we had to bring county back first, you're asking far fewer teams and far fewer players to follow guidelines when we're taking those initial steps back. Whereas this time, it's clubs are having to take the onus, and then obviously things will hopefully have settled down by the time intercounty gets back. So is too much being asked of clubs?
Well, look, and I think it was the president said, and I think I don't know of anybody that would have disagreed with him, that clubs should get priority when resumption would take place. So I suppose it's that I think that was the right decision by the GA. Yes, there's going to be a lot of pressure on clubs, but look, they just have to get themselves organised. Their executive committees will sit down this week and then assign responsibilities to people and realise what's going on. Players are going to have to buy into it, because before players come to training now, they have to fill up a form. In the case of younger players, their parents must fill that up and sign it off. They need to come. With knowing what their temperature is, for example, each day. So there's a lot of process there. But look, it's not beyond the ingenuity of clubs to do that. I think they're generally good people in clubs, and they'll understand that this is the environment we're in at this point in time. And hopefully, things will get better during the course of the next couple of months, and some of those measures will be slackened off. I mean, obviously, dressing rooms will be opened in a couple of weeks anyway, so there'll be new processes around there. So this is a very new scenario, and the term "the new normal" is being mentioned here. So it will be the new normal for the foreseeable future until we get back to what was the old normal. And I mean, many will say maybe we will never get back to the old normal.
It's true. Do you see county managers playing ball here? They're not supposed to have players till September the 14th, but already you hear of anecdotal stories about how they're trying to get players to train in groups. I mean, it could even be a situation where a county final is down for the 21st of September and county managers are looking to have a first official training session in the guts of 6 months that same week.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of conflicts. I think, first of all, we've been hearing for a long time the challenges of the club environment out there. And I think by putting the club competition now into a specific window, we're now seeing that different counties are going to have to come up with different formula of running their competitions. Some will do it on full knockout. More will be able to do it on a mini league system where they might have 4 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 4 or something in that line. More might be able to run off some league competitions in some form or other before they head into the championship. So we're now going to see, and this will be an interesting exercise to see what's going to happen here. But I do think that with club competitions starting up sometime in July, there's going to be, and the expectation is that county finals will be played in the early part of October. County seniors training to start on the 14th or thereabouts of September. I can immediately see conflict of where the county manager will want access to their players from the 14th of September. Yet, the club championships at the various grades are not going to be completed before that date. So there is the potential for conflict there. So this is something county boards are going to have to sit down with their team managers at a very early stage and make sure that there's whatever problems are likely to arise, they get them sorted out in advance. And that is obviously a particular problem where you have a dual code county, particularly where dual codes are perhaps of equal or thereabouts measure. So that's going to cause, so there are some challenges to overcome there. But I think to be fair to Croke Park, this is something that county board officers are now going to have to get their head around and start planning within the confines of the timetables that are laid out.
In your experience, do intercounty managers hold so much sway over county boards that they might almost dictate what way these schedules go? I mean, in some counties, dual counties, it might be insisted on a knockout by the intercounty manager, or would they have that much sway?
They do in some cases, yeah, they do, and that's why it's important now that a timeline has been laid out and the structure has been laid out for the competitions, and the county boards are probably finalising those structures within their counties this week. I think that they better sit down with the team managers and not be having a big fight, or we could call it, closer to when these competitions are taking place, that there's a clear understanding of the games that have to be played and the timeline and the fairness of allowing the inter-county player access to the club, not just post 14th December, not just to turn up to play the games, but they're there and not in the field as well when the lads are training, and to have that sort of camaraderie in the club that's required in order to make success of the championship.
You're obviously a big club man there at Conaghy Shamrocks, and I was there when your club won the All-Ireland club title earlier in the year. If, as expected, there's no provincial or All-Ireland club series, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can't see that happening at the moment. It hasn't really been anything said about it, but realistically, if we're looking at playing the club championships completed in October, one could say that there's a fair possibility that you could play a club championship. But then you've got to understand that the proviso there has to be that a club championship would have to go ahead without any inter-county players involved. And how would a club feel about that taking place? Because it would be impossible for the inter-county manager, I say, to release players. Now, again, I suppose that's also, we have to consider, we don't know what the format coming out from the CCC yet in relation to the championships. Is it going to be a knockout system? Now, I suspect that counties would probably want to be given a minimum of 2 games in either championship, but you're not going to have the round robin systems of Leinster and Munster, and you're not going to have the football qualifiers, you're not going to have tier 2 in football. They cannot be accommodated this year, so some different formula has to come up. So it depends on how much time that's going to take and how many counties are going to be involved in that straight up to the final towards the end of November, which is envisaged, and whether a club championship is realistic to play parallel with that if inter-county players not available. Because while inter-county players opt out of the inter-county scene during the league if their club is involved in the club championship, I'm not so sure that they opt out of the inter-county championship in the same scenario.
Yeah, because I'm trying to picture the club final earlier this year, Ballyhale against Borrisoleigh. Would that happen without Adrian Mullen, TJ Reid, Brendan Maher, Dan McCormack? And you can obviously go to the football side.
I couldn't see that happening. I mean, we all know they missed a lot of the league, and that's fair enough. But I do think that's not going to happen. You're not going to see under 17 and under 20, I would imagine, this year. I'd like to think, though, that they might finish off the second level competitions that were very close to completion there before this whole pandemic struck in. There's a few games left in that, and while most of the young lads have left their respective schools, I'd like to see those finished out, and I think they could be finished off perhaps during the autumn if they can manage to get in some midweek games. Now, I know some of the lads would probably have gone on to college, but I think it would be nice to finish off those over a short window just to bring completion, because third level was more or less completed, bar perhaps freshers and a few other secondary competitions.
Do you think that certain counties are going to have a huge advantage going into the football and hurling All-Ireland series? And I'm talking about inter-county level, because let's say Brian Cody, he probably will see his players have their games spaced out a nice bit better. I know there is a football championship in Kilkenny, but it's normally just played off quickly in March, if I remember correctly. Whereas the likes of Clare, you might have Podge Collins, for example, playing with Cratloe, and he might have to play every second week. And Brian Lohan will be pulling his hair out thinking about how many games some of these guys are going to have to play. So same with Wexford and Davy Fitz. A huge amount of those guys are dual players. Liam Sheedy will be looking at Noel McGrath playing Bo Coates, and he's worried too. This is something that's happening across the board. So certain managers and counties are going to have an advantage.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. I think it's going to put an awful lot of pressure on some players. Players may have to make the choice themselves. Now, they shouldn't be forced to make that choice, but they may have to make the choice if they're part of an inter-county panel, say at hurling, that they must maybe stick to the hurling within the club environment as well, and vice versa. Now, I know it's a pity players having to be forced to do that, but I do think that if you're going to be playing week after week after week, and you're straight into the inter-county season, This is going to put a hell of a lot of pressure on players. Now, they will have built up a certain amount of level of fitness, even during this pandemic, where they were doing a certain amount of training at home. They probably a lot of them have home gyms of some kind. They were running, pounding the roads or the local fields and that. But because they haven't been collectively, I suppose, together, it can still be difficult enough for the trainer of the intercounty team to assess exactly how they're doing until they actually come together on the 14th of September. But there is going to be some challenges down the line, the way you have described it there, Shane. And I think these are matters, I think, equally that county boards need to sit down with the respective team managers in the counties and have that chat now rather than leave it until later on and an unholy row. And particularly in a situation where a player could pick up a bit of an injury in a club game, and the reality of it is that rest is the best thing that can happen to a player rather than playing for one or other of the codes.
There's an issue with not having standardised championships across the country and within counties, isn't there?
There is, but the reality of it is when you have a county, big counties where you have, if you take some counties that have a huge amount of senior teams, other counties don't have as many. They're smaller counties at a smaller number of clubs. The counties with the smaller number of clubs, I suppose, have greater flexibility now in what they can offer their players in terms of the number of games. But if you're going to turn around now and just offer a club player one game and have a knockout championship, and that's the only game they're going to get, I think they're going to feel shortchanged. Now, they may supplement that with some type of league system that could happily run in parallel with an intercounty championship, and perhaps that's what they will do. But I do think that when it comes to the actual championship, I think most counties now have some sort of we call it a backdoor or a second chance scenario, which I think they're entitled to given the amount of effort and preparation. But within this narrower window, that's not going to be practical or possible, I'd say, in every county.
And do you think that there's any possibility to play off the provincial and All-Ireland Club Series upon the completion of the inter-county seasons, as in maybe in December, January? Because you could play it off in 5 weekends in a row if you wanted.
Yeah, no, I do think there's a fair possibility. I suppose we're not going to be weather dependent. Generally speaking, weather is not too bad in the latter half of the year. It's in the springtime it gets worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's a fair possibility, but it is going to be weather dependent. It's also going to be what condition pitches are going to be in to take that level of games. And bear in mind, and this is an issue with September and October as well, the evenings will be getting darker earlier. So the options of playing games in midweek will not be there as easy. Otherwise, you'd be starting matches at 5 and half 5, and lads would have to get off work early if they're not going to stick to a weekend schedule of Saturday or Sunday. So the options in terms of the timelines of playing the games are not as good. But December and January are definitely options, and for the benefit of getting the competitions played, there wouldn't be a bad option. As you say yourself, I mean, Christmas could become a very important part of the GA season this coming year.
Absolutely. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to try with the schedules for the inter-county seasons? Because people are always crying out for change, that it's an archaic system. The provinces, especially in Gaelic football, there's a couple of provinces there's no real value to them, I suppose, to some degree anymore. Is there anything you'd like to see tried?
I probably wouldn't mind for the year that's in it and the way things have gone, just to see a complete open draw across the two codes. Well, what I mean an open draw is that you kind of groups of teams where every county gets maybe 2 or 3 games, but they're all played in parallel with one another. And I think it just would be, it's an opportunity to try something else out. And I know that means that provincial councils might lose out, but I do think this is an opportunity to do a trial on what a kind of an open draw type competition would look like, giving inter-county players a couple of games and just checking how that might be perceived, how the supporters might see it, and how it would result in the end of the day. I mean, it may very well mean that the winners of both competitions may very well be the teams that have been winning in the past, and so be it if that is the case. But it would be worth testing the formula just to see how it might work out as a pointer to what might come down the road. And I think even the president of the GA has alluded to that in recent days, that perhaps the provincial competitions, maybe are something that the GA has to seriously look at.
The injuries have been a bit of an issue as the Bundesliga has come back for the last few weeks. A lot of muscle injuries, and even as a GAA player, I know now that there's going to be a change from maybe running 5Ks, running on different surfaces, not wearing studs, to all of a sudden wearing studs out in the field. So the risk of injury is very, very high. Can the GAA do more to sort of get a message down to clubs, get the right codes of practice, get the right warm-ups, or is it really down to the clubs?
Well, one of the things the GAA has been very good at over the last couple of months, as the pandemic has been on top of us, is the number of webinars and online education that it has drifted out. And there was a fair bit done on the coaching side, of course, but there's also in the whole area of injury management and rehabilitation and that. And I think most counties now have people at a professional level who are well capable of guiding the manager and the trainer in there in the best way of handling the load on the people. But the point I made to you there earlier, that I suppose realistically it may not be influence at all these young players. Now they may very well be turning up in remote locations at the present. But nevertheless, I do think that when they arrive on the 14th of September, that's going to be one of the things that will be assessed. I think going into serious training in the next couple of weeks. I imagine county trainers will probably be in touch with the respective club trainers, and there'll be a dialogue there to make sure consistency of that the intercounty lads and the club are doing, and what they might be doing inside in an Olin Park or Thurles or a Parnell Park or Páirc Uí Chaoimh or Killarney, wherever it might be. So I do think now that given that there's a lot of emphasis on club coming first, I think the communications line between the intercounty mentors, management and club is probably now going to be more important than ever.
I'm going to ask you one final question. We're facing into a winter All-Ireland. Who do you make as favourites for a winter hurling All-Ireland, assuming that all players were fit for all teams?
I'm not sure it's going to make an awful lot of difference, I suppose, to be honest about it. I don't think... I think, look, in hurling at the moment, there is probably 5 or 6 counties. Any one of 5 or 6 could equally win the hurling. In terms of probably a bit less, I think maybe. But if this is an opportunity, maybe this will throw up something different. Maybe this will be what happened in the mid-90s in hurling, where we saw Wexford and Clare coming back after a long period. Maybe that's what will happen again. And sure, if it happens, wouldn't it be great for both codes? There's a bit of an unknown coming up here, because players are not going into maybe the championships prepared as they would have been in the past, to be honest about it. And how will that? We're not sure. So, but in a way, that doubt is creating its own level of excitement for those of us who follow sport and you who report on sport. I think it just creates that level of excitement, and that it's perhaps the unknown that really looking forward to.
Nicky, you've been brilliant with your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Shane. Take care.